Good morning. It's good to see you today. It is the Gospels Wednesday. Come on to Luke 5. Let's talk about Simon. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus comes upon Simon and James and John. There they are washing and mending their nets. The Lord starts teaching from Simon's boat, a little ways from shore. And then in verse 4, the Lord says, "Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." Let's talk about Simon. One of the points I want you to think about is that it is easy to follow the Lord when your nets are empty. Okay, right? All of a sudden they bring up those nets and they have so many fish that their boats are starting to sink. Right? Sometimes it's easy. It's easier to follow the Lord when business is not doing well. Right? When you don't have anything left. When you don't have two pennies to rub together. When the Lord tells you to leave everything and follow Him, if you don't have anything to leave, sometimes it's a little easier to follow the Lord. That's why not many noble are called. Simon, he left everything just as business was booming. Another point I want you to think about, it's easy to follow the Lord if that just means washing your nets, washing and mending your nets. What I mean by that is, it's easy to follow the Lord when all that means is you go to Bible class, you study yourself, you examine yourself, you make sure that you're walking the straight and narrow. But it becomes more difficult when you start becoming your brother's keeper. When you start dealing with the fish, all of a sudden you start dealing with different and distinct personalities. And sometimes it's messy, and sometimes you get hurt, and you get dirty, and it's hard work. Right? It's easy to follow the Lord when all it means is you just simply study yourself, and you never worry about anyone else. That's the second point. The third point I wanted to mention is that it is easy to follow the Lord when it means you don't have to launch out into the deep. You ever notice that? The Lord tells him. He doesn't simply say, cast your net down. He says, launch out into the deep. It's easy to follow the Lord when it means you can stay close to shore. But to launch out into the deep, that starts becoming more difficult. You think about what that means for Simon as we go from Jew to Gentile. He was going to have to launch out into the deep. Also, as another point, it's easy to follow the Lord when you are not confronted with your own sin. Remember what Simon says, right? He says, be merciful to, as he says, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. Right? It's easy to follow the Lord when you're not confronted with your own sin. When the Lord is telling you, well done, thou good and faithful servant, when the Lord is giving you that attaboy, when the Lord is cheering you on, it's easy to follow the Lord then. But when He turns around and He says, one thing you lack, when the Lord looks at you like He's going to look at Simon Peter and you remember that you've sinned, that's when it becomes a little harder to follow the Lord, and it takes determination. Because, as our fifth point, it's easy to follow the Lord when nothing has to change. Think about Simon. Here he had been a fisherman probably his whole life. And granted, he's still going to be a fisherman, but he's going to be a completely different kind of fisherman. He's going to have to come out of that boat as he starts preaching the gospel. Right? It's easy to follow the Lord when nothing has to change. Everything was going to have to change for Simon. Right? It's going to be such a change. When nothing has to change, it's easy to follow the Lord then. Hope you think about our points. You might think about others you might think of. But anyway, hope you have a good day. God bless you. See you tomorrow morning.